Alright everybody, today we're talking about my rewrite of Star Wars Episode 1. As I let you know, I've gone all out with a total of 9 pages of material here. All for you. For real, I've been working on this idea for I don't know how long. Maybe I first had the idea in 2013 or 14, something like that. So it's been the better part of the last decade that I've been formulating the ideas for this. If you haven't seen my opening video for what I'm doing here, click the link that's right here, and you can watch that and then come back and watch this video. I outlined the rules for what I'm doing and why I think Disney or whoever should remake Star Wars, and why I think that I've got some good ideas. So with that, I'm just going to dive right into my rewrite. And as I go along, I'll describe how I've kind of rewritten some of the characters too. I have character bios. I've done a lot of work on this, and I don't even know why, but I just like it. So, Act 1, we start in Naboo. We just start straight in the throne room. Amidala is staring at the sky while she sees the Federation ships moving into place around her planet. She's sad. She walks to her throne, where Sio Bibble, her advisor, and Panaka, her security officer, are standing, and she pushes a button where Palpatine appears in a hologram, and she states, things haven't changed, negotiations have broken down, and the Federation is about to invade. Something needs to be done. He states, Jedi have been sent, they'll be able to handle it when they arrive. But he says he can't do anything because he's busy with his campaign running for Chancellor. So he's already, just right out of the bat, he's expressing that he's wanting to run for Supreme Chancellor. Out in space, the Jedi do arrive to confront Gunray. Newt meets them himself, Newt and his sidekick guy. So they meet the Jedi themselves, but Newt is actually pretty intelligent, and he realizes pretty quickly that these guys are Jedi, because they arrive, disguised as not Jedi, but he realizes that they're Jedi, and is like, we need to get out of here, so he leaves, promises refreshment, and instead they're met with droids that attack them. This is when we establish that the droids are fighting for equal rights, basically. They are an artificial intelligence. They believe that they are equal to the organic life within the universe. But Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan dispatch of the droids and move on. Newt Gunray informs Darth Sidious of the situation and decide that they should invade, but keep the Queen alive. This is also where we establish that Naboo is important because they have Kyber crystals. Now, in the expanded universe, Kyber crystals are the crystals that are found in lightsabers, and it's also the crystal used to create the Death Star. So that'll come back in later. So Naboo is rich in Kyber crystals, and that's what they're looking for. The Jedi escape to Naboo to warn and rescue the Queen and the whole royal family, but they're waylaid by a massive contingent of droids. It looks like it's kind of the end for them in some degree, when suddenly, out of the bush, comes this ragtag group of men and Gungans who gun down all of the droids. And at the lead of this group is Jar Jar Binks. Now, I'm completely revamping Jar Jar Binks. He's still going to be humorous, because I think he needs to be. He's still going to be quirky and irreverent and sarcastic, but he's going to be like an ex-gun smuggler. So, there you go. He comes from this smuggler kind of side of Star Wars lore, and here he is on Naboo, leading a sort of resistance against the droids. He advises them not to go straight to Theed, because it's been overrun, but rather to go see the Gungans. They arrive at the Gungan city, but the Gungans initially just decide they're going to turn them away. Jar Jar then says, well, at least give us a ship. So they give them a ship, and Jar Jar is an excellent pilot. So Jar Jar decides that he's going to pilot the ship through the planet's core to get to Theed. That's the fastest way. Meanwhile, in Theed, Queen Amidala, who is a real queen. She wasn't elected, so it's not like some weird president that is elected and just happens to be called queen. No, she's born with the birthright to be queen, and she will continue to be queen for the entire series. So she's talking with her aide, Sio Bibble, and he suggests they should promote and encourage an uprising from the people, but she says, no, let's not push our people to the point of extinction. Because Naboo is not a warfaring planet. They're very peaceful. This is where she says, I wish the Senate were of more help in times like these. Mandalore or Kashyyyk would make short work of these invaders. So we imply right now that she's already lost faith to some degree in the Republic as it stands. However, Gunray invades the throne room, captures her, and takes her away. They want to keep her alive so that they can force the humans that are left to mine the Kaiba crystals that they're so desperate to get. As they move Padme to the safe zone, that's when the Jedi and Jar Jar arrive, and they dispatch the droids. And again, the droids start issuing kind of like organic life hate speech of some kind. They rescue the Queen. The Queen is surprised that Jar Jar, a Gungan, would rescue her. And he says it's no big deal. At which point she says, would you be my representative to the Gungans? And he says, we'll see. Diplomacy isn't my area of expertise. Amidala states at that point that they need to go to the Senate. They need to get there to get help. She leaves Sade, who, if you don't know, that's her body double. So she leaves Sade on Naboo looking like her. So the whole thing is predicated on the idea that we're going to leave the Queen on Naboo, and some of the delegates of Naboo are going to go to Coruscant. That means that Newt Gunray's eyes are going to be fixated on Naboo and not on the ship that's leaving. So they head to the hangar where the ships are, and they realize they don't have a pilot for their ship, but they learn that Jar Jar knows how to pilot big ships. Initially, Panaka, Amidala's captain of the guard, doesn't trust Jar Jar. He doesn't see him as a trustworthy guy because he hates Gungans for some personal reason. But the Queen in disguise, now it's the same thing. So the disguised Padme is among the crew that's going to be in the ship. She says the Queen has entrusted him with this mission too, and Panaka nods because he knows that she's the Queen. So they break into the hangar. They do free some other pilots, but none of them can fly the big ship. They're all fighter pilots. So they all hop in their own fighter ships to defend the big ship as it flies. And as they're defending it, Jar Jar tries to jump into hyperspeed, but realizes that the hyperdrive has been dismantled. So R2-D2 hooks in and is able to get them a short jump to go where they need to go. And so they realize that Tatooine is within their range, and so they jump to Tatooine. But the hyperdrive has been dismantled, so they need a new one. At this point, Newt Gunray informs Sidious that Naboo is now under his control. The Queen is in his capture, but he does say the ship got out and is likely headed for Coruscant. Sidious hates this and rages against him and says Darth Maul will locate and intercept and destroy the ship. On Tatooine, the group lands on the outskirts of the city, just like they do in the movie. They decide to create a team, basically the same team as before in the original film, except with the addition of Panaka. I just feel like having another Naboo human there makes more sense. Also, he knows it's the Queen, so why would he let her go on her own with people he doesn't really know? And they go to a few different stores until they finally find Watto's. All the other stores were nicer. Watto's is a piece of junk, but they find it and he actually has the piece. Again, they have the wrong currency, and there's no currency exchange place, so they're kind of at their wits' end. Padme, however, runs into Anakin in the scrapyard. And Anakin says, you're looking for a hyperdrive. No one's told him that they're looking for a hyperdrive. He just knows. And she's impressed. So she brings him to the rest of the group. He says, look, I have a plan. He assures all of them that he can help. And asked why he wants to help them, he responds that it's the most decent thing to do. If he were stuck on a planet he didn't want to be on, he'd want someone to help him out. Then he insists that he needs to show them the solution instead of tell them. So he takes them back to his house, at which point we get to the Skywalker house, where he has his mom, Shmi, and sister, Beru. So I'm retconning the idea of Beru being a stranger. She's Anakin's sister. So they're attending to chores. They warmly welcome Anakin home and all the strangers as well. And then Anakin rushes them along. He's like, come on, we just need to go see the solution. So they get behind the house and where the pod racer is, where his friend, Kitster, which is the little human boy in the original, and C-3PO are working on the ship, which he's titled the Thunderbolt. This is where we see that C-3PO is treated like a member of the family. So he's not just some tool to be used by the Skywalker family. They genuinely see him as a member of the family. Jar Jar, having been on Tatooine, is automatically in love with the pod and the pod racer, and he knows all about it. Qui-Gon knows enough about it to be intrigued, and he knows that normal human shouldn't be able to pilot something that complex at those speeds, and then, it's the whole thing. Qui-Gon assumes that Anakin has force sensitivity. Then Anakin suggests they should enter him into the race. Watto doesn't know that he's built it, so Watto can't claim anything for his own. In this version, they don't make a deal with Watto for Watto to enter the pod. They just go and offer the ship as collateral to the race organizers. Around this time, during this sequence of events, is when C-3PO and R2-D2 start to bond. We actually also see C-3PO speaking in another language. I don't know if I've ever actually seen him speak. Maybe he speaks in like one other language in like episode 5 or 6, but we see him speak in R2-D2's whistle language. Obi-Wan, who's still on the ship, then contacts Qui-Gon and says that the Queen has sent them a message declaring basically the same things that Seal Bibble does in the original. Jar Jar asks about the Gungans, but there has been no word, and he becomes frustrated and sad by that. Anakin informs them that the race will be the next day, actually, and that it'll be commemorating Tatooine's Independence Day. Qui-Gon asks what the Independence is from, and Anakin states, I don't know. Decency? You'd have to ask the Hutts on that one. Anakin then states that people from all over the galaxy will be present, and Qui-Gon says they'll need to be careful not to be seen. That night, Qui-Gon and Anakin have the heart-to-heart they do in the original, except this time it's a bit more personal. This time it cuts more to the central conflict of Anakin's character. We understand what Anakin wants, which is to stop slavery, war, crime, and to see a galaxy completely unified in peace. Qui-Gon's impressed, starts asking him about Anakin's relation to the Force and his use of it so far, and asks about Anakin's father, at which point Shmi interrupts and tells Anakin to go to bed. Anakin, being a typical teenager, responds as a typical teenager. He's like, I'm not a kid, but he does it anyway. Qui-Gon then asks her about his father, and Shmi says it's a touchy subject and holds back tears, saying she doesn't know anything about him before wishing Qui-Gon good night. So, in this version, Anakin actually has a father. It's not some kind of mystical Force dad. The next day, they're preparing for the race. Jar Jar, in particular, is really excited. The race begins. This time there's no false start for Anakin. Anakin just goes straight into the race like normal. It's been stated before that everyone cheats in the Boonta Eve pod race. Everyone. It's just like tradition. But Anakin refuses to cheat. This is his moral compass. He refuses to be a cheater. And this is made clear through the way that he interacts with the other racers during the race. However, he's able to use the Force to a degree that allows him to gain the upper hand in almost every single situation. So he can force push, force pull things back into place that come off of his pod racer, and he senses things before they happen, so he can predict about like a couple seconds ahead what anyone's gonna do. Sebulba mocks him during the race, and right at the end of the race, Sebulba, instead of doing the thing where he like bumps him, he actually pulls out a laser pistol and is about to shoot Anakin. And Anakin uses the Force to deflect the laser, and instead of deflecting off into the air, it deflects right into Sebulba's engine, immediately blowing it up, and the rest of Sebulba's pod careens into a cliff, and Sebulba dies. Completely within the rules, Anakin wins, but he feels incredibly guilty for Sebulba's death, knowing that he caused it. Padme comes up to him, still disguised as a servant of some kind, gives him a hug and says it will be okay. Jar Jar is super excited and super amazed that he knows the winner of the Boonta Eve race, and so he raises him up on his shoulders and runs around, at which point we see a cloaked figure standing in the shadows. Now, we've already seen this cloaked figure before, also on Tatooine. I forgot to mention that. After the race, Qui-Gon confronts Watto for Anakin's freedom, and with the prize money, which is massive, he's able to buy the hyperdrive and the freedom for all of the Skywalkers. Watto's like, have fun with your new slaves. So he goes back and tells Shmi and Beru that they've all been freed. They're all very excited, obviously, and Qui-Gon asks what they'll do with their freedom. Shmi says, I always wanted freedom, and now I plan to work for the freedom of others. With the money I'd saved for our freedom, I can begin that process now. So she decides to stay on Tatooine to help free other slaves. She and Beru are going to start working on that. Anakin, however, wants to become a Jedi Knight, and so he comes up and says to Qui-Gon, I'd like to be trained. Qui-Gon thinks about it for a second and says yes, he wants to be Anakin's father figure, recognizing that that's what Anakin needs. They have a similar heart-to-heart situation where the whole family kind of, is sad to see Anakin go. They decide to leave C-3PO there with Shmi because Shmi is going to need a translator to help with all the various species that live on Tatooine with the slavery thing. As they leave, Shmi goes and tells Qui-Gon, don't let him look for his father. There is only heartbreak there. Qui-Gon promises that, and they leave. They start going back to their ship, and that cloaked figure that we saw after the race and earlier suddenly appears, and it's Darth Maul. He attacks them with this ferociousness that we don't see in the movie. He's almost like a wild animal. Obi-Wan comes out to fight against Maul as well, and they hold them off while they get everyone into the ship and the hyperdrive ready. They eventually get everything prepared, and Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon hop back into the ship, and Maul actually uses the Force to hold the ship back. He's trying to use the Force to pull the ship back to the planet, but Jar Jar jumps to hyperspace right there. Maul is infuriated and raged. Inside the ship, Anakin meets Obi-Wan for the first time, and he immediately is in awe of Obi-Wan's skills against Maul. Qui-Gon informs Obi-Wan that they are brother apprentices now, and that Obi-Wan needs to teach Anakin all that he knows. At this point, Anakin goes and finds Padme and says he's glad they've all made it safely through. She shares his sentiment. Then Anakin says, "I'm glad you're safe too." Padme looks at him strangely and says, "Thank you, Anakin." He then looks deeply into her eyes, wordlessly, and she feels magnetically attracted to him, but she's a bit confused as to why. She feels like she's almost being forced to be attracted to him. He blushes, the feeling goes away, and he apologizes and leaves the room. And that's where I'll leave you for this week. As you can see, there's still about half of a movie left to discuss, and I'd like to also talk about like what I would do with casting, and I want to go a little bit more into some of the character bios. So come back next week, click that subscribe button, give me a like, and hopefully I'll see you next week for the continuation of episode 1, The Phantom Rewrite. See you later, and don't go wrangling alligators in your spare time unless you're well trained.